Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Craig Burrell, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is leading aircraft woman Chantel Bradford. Today we commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of the Guadalcanal campaign during the Second World War. After the Japanese surprise attacks on Pearl Harbor, Malaya and other locations in December 1941, over the following months they sought to further extend their perimeter southwards to capture Port Moresby in Papua and eastwards into the Central Pacific. In early May 1942, as part of the plan to take Moresby, the Japanese also moved on the Southern Solomons, seizing Tulagai and Guadalcanal. There, they established forward air bases to support possible future advances toward New Caledonia, Fiji and Samoa, thereby cutting the supply lines between Australia and the United States. This presented a grave danger to Australia at this point in the war. But in three key battles, the Japanese advance was stopped: at the Battle of the Coral Sea in May, at Midway in June, and at Guadalcanal, beginning in August 1942. On the 7th of August, the Allies launched Operation Watchtower, a major move to retake Guadalcanal and the nearby islands. Australians were involved from the outset. HMAS Australia provided a shore bombardment in support of the US Marine landings on the main island, while HMAS Hobart and Canberra were part of the screening force protecting the landings. 2 nights later, HMAS Canberra was lost. 84 Australian sailors died. Over the coming months, the Marines, then US Army units, endured bitter fighting in horrendous conditions, but slowly they gained the upper hand. By early 1943, the Japanese decided to withdraw from Guadalcanal. The evacuation was complete by the 9th of February, 80 years ago today. Losses had been appalling. Some 30,000 Japanese and about 7,000 Americans died during the campaign. The part played by Royal Australian Navy ships at the beginning of the campaign was only part of our involvement. Australians also played a vital role as coast watchers. Soon you will hear the story of one of these brave individuals. Today we remember all those who fought and died in the Guadalcanal campaign, whose names are recorded here on the Roll of Honour. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of Galilee Regional Catholic Primary School, South Melbourne, Victoria. If you are able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem.
Toil, our home is but by
Students, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the hearts of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we will read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first, we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Lieutenant Gordon Henry Charles Train. Gordon Train was born in Sydney, suburb of Balmain, on the 4th of August 1909, the only child of Charles and Jeannie. Train eventually found work and a career in the South Pacific. After being employed as a purser on various Burns-filled ships between 1926 and 1928, he became a civil servant working for the British Solomon Islands government. In 1931, Gordon married Vera Atkinson, whose family owned Balalay Island in the Shortland group of the Northern Solomons. Gordon and Vera's son Digby was born on 1939, the year of the Second World War broke out. The family remained in the Solomons, where Gordon was a Treasury official on the tiny island of Tulagi. In July 1941, at Tulagi, the administrative capital of the Solomons at the time, the Australians stationed a small detachment of troops, plus some RAF airmen operating a near seaplane base. Defences were prepared, training began with local militia, and a number of stay-behind coast watchers were put in place on various islands throughout the group. Coast watchers were originally civilians who lived in the coastal regions or islands of the South and Southwest Pacific. The coast watching network was set up in early 1920s to provide intelligence on enemy movements in time of war. In December 1941, Japan launched surprise attacks on Pearl Harbor, Malaya, and other locations across the Asia-Pacific region. With only a few months, they had pushed Allied forces back and captured a vast territory. It was quickly decided to evacuate civilian staff from Tulagi, meaning that Gordon, his wife, and son were back in Sydney before the end of the year. In April 1942, the Japanese attempted to capture Port Moresby in New Guinea. At the same time, they moved to capture Tulagi and establish a base there for moves further southward. That would prove to be a serious danger to Australia, cutting lines of supply and communication with the United States. In early May 1942, the invasion of Port Moresby was repulsed at the Battle of the Coral Sea, but Japanese naval forces captured Tulagi. Most of the Australian military personnel managed to get away to the New Hebrides just in time, but some remained, as did the coast watchers. Theirs would be a dangerous job, operating behind enemy lines, observing and reporting on movements. They soon observed the Japanese begin construction of a forward air base in Guadalcanal. It was not long before the Americans moved to recapture the Solomons. Operation Watchtower was launched on the 7th of August 1942, with US Marines quickly capturing Tulagi and landing a force on Guadalcanal just across the bay. There began a grueling 7-month campaign of intense and bitter fighting that would prove to be one of the key battles in the Pacific. Meanwhile, back in Sydney, Gordon Train had signed on with the Royal Australian Navy Volunteer Reserve. He would be going back to the Solomons to add his local knowledge to the coast-watching effort. And if he was captured, holding rank might provide him with the protection of combatant status. Appointed lieutenant in May, by the end of June, Gordon was at HMAS Magnetic, the Royal Australian Navy's shore base at Townsville. From there, he sailed for Villa, capital of the New Hebrides, arriving on the 25th of July, 1942. Only a week after the Marines landed on the Guadalcanal, they were joined by coast watchers. They were Lieutenant Commander Mackenzie, Lieutenant Gordon Train, a civilian radio operator, Mr. Eadie, and Raymond, a New Ireland native. This group immediately got to work providing intelligence on Japanese troop movements on Guadalcanal as well as further afield. Of special value were their early warnings of the arrival of Japanese reinforcements and incoming air raids. The successful defence of the Marine position on Guadalcanal was heavily reliant on the Coast Watch's timely information. Mackenzie, Train, and their colleagues operated from a dugout among the coconut palms on the northwest edge of the airfield. Conditions were primitive and miserable. It often rained, and keeping the radio equipment operating in muddy conditions was a challenge. They also endured numerous air raids and survived several near misses. During one enemy naval bombardment, Train and Raymond shared a trench. As the shells fell nearer and nearer, Raymond whispered, "I am frightened." "So am I, Raymond," whispered Gordon Train. He remained on the Guadalcanal for the duration of the campaign. When the Japanese were finally defeated, they left the island by the 9th of February 1943. US Admiral William Halsey stated plainly that the Coast Watchers saved Guadalcanal, and Guadalcanal saved the South Pacific. Such was the importance of their contribution. Due to be soon released back to his civilian duties, Train continued to provide valuable intelligence as the Japanese were pushed back into the Northern Solomons. On the 5th of March 1943, Train was on board an American bomber looking to strike enemy targets in the Shortland Group of Islands, an area he knew well. The aircraft failed to return, and nothing was ever learnt of its fate. Gordon Train was among those listed as missing, presumed dead. He was 33 years old. Lieutenant Gordon Train is commemorated in the United Kingdom on the Plymouth Naval Memorial for British and Commonwealth sailors who know no grave. His name is also listed on the Australian War Memorial's Roll of Honour to my left-hand side, amongst 40,000 Australians who died while serving in the Second World War. A photograph of his name is listed on the Plymouth Naval Memorial is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of many stories of service and of sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lieutenant Gordon Henry Charles Train, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They have no grave but the cruel sea, no flowers lay at their head. A rusting hulk is their tombstone, a fast on the ocean bed. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them. Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the director, staff and volunteers, thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening.